without further ado, someone who has become a good friend and like a brother from another mother, Mr. Mike Ritzius.
Thanks, man. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Barry. So I have a disclaimer on my presentation here. This is going to be a bunch of little stories. This is not in sequence or whatever. And they may sound really intentional, but I really just got lucky and fell into most of these things that I'm going to share with you. So my 6-word memoir here is, what happens if I press this? And this has kind of been the question that has driven my entire life. So when I was 5 or 6 years old, my mom had me in the mall, and she was having lunch at the food court. And I wandered over to the escalator, and I saw this little button there. I was like, what happens if I press this? And I pressed it, and half the people almost fell down the escalator because it stopped very suddenly. So yeah, this has been the story of my life. That question drove me to be really interested in sciences when I was growing up. I took a lot of elective science classes. I always wanted to know why things worked the way they did and what led them to do what they did. I went to college for science. I thought I was going to go into pharmaceuticals and cure cancer or maybe AIDS or something along those lines. And after I graduated college with a degree in molecular biology, I worked at Thomas Jefferson University for a few years as a molecular biologist in electrophysiology lab. And it was a rude awakening for me because in college, in science classes, I was there with all my buddies, and we had a lot of fun when we were doing labs, and some of those labs are long and drawn out, but we were able to socialize and whatnot. And then when I got into the real world, I realized that most scientists are the most painful introverts you'll ever meet. And nobody wanted to talk to anybody. And the fact that most of my colleagues spoke English as a second language made it even harder. So introverts who do not speak English made for very lonely work. And while the theory was really fascinating for me, the work itself was not. You know, the joke was that micro and molecular biology is a job for alcoholics because you work for a half an hour, you set up your experiments, and then you wait 10 hours, and you waste those 10 hours at the bar. And then you come back and you finish your experiments and set them up again, and they run for another 10 hours. So you sleep off what you did to yourself at the bar. So I learned that this was not a profession for me because I'm someone who is really a social thinker. You know, like I do most of my thinking outside of my own head, and I talk a lot. I'll have very animated conversations with myself in the car, which is very embarrassing when I was driving home from work some days because my colleagues would pull up next to me and be like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, you know, in the car, and nobody else was in there with me. So, and this was before cell phones and Bluetooth were a big thing. So they're like, "That guy's nuts." So I wanted to keep using my degree, and I decided to go into teaching. So I decided to try my hand, you know, so in teaching. So I went the alternate route and tried to become a science teacher, and I got very lucky with that, you know. So I just passed my practice test, and my father owned a little sporting goods store, and I didn't have a printer at the time. So I went over to my dad's store, and I was printing out my resume. And just as I was doing that, a gentleman walks in, and my dad says, "Oh, I want to introduce you to my friend Mike, or my son Mike." And he's like, "This is my friend Barry Adamson. He's an athletic director over at Camden County Tech." And he's like, "My son's going to be he wants to be a science teacher." And Mr. Adamson said, "Give me a resume." He's like, "We'll see if we have anything for you." 2 weeks later, I had a job. So I was very fortunate that way. So I started teaching, and the first 2 years were real eye-openers for me. I led a pretty sheltered childhood. I grew up in a very white, blue-collar town. I went to a very small Catholic school for grades 1 through 8. I went to a private, very privileged prep school for college. I went to a very small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. I think there were 7 students of color in both my high school and college. And then I went to work with PhDs. And next thing I know, I am teaching students at Camden County Tech, the vast majority of whom came from Camden City, and more than half of that student population had IEPs. So it was a big eye-opener for me. And the first couple of years were really just about survival when I was teaching those students, because I was never trained as a teacher either, so I had that disadvantage. So I spent a lot of time in survival mode those first couple of years, but I had this really great mentor. Her name was Diane Healy. Diane was a little bit my mom, a lot my friend, and she did a lot to keep me in there. And she gave me some of the best advice anyone had ever given me about teaching and life in general, really. I was finding myself really frustrated when I was working in that school because we were told to do a lot of things working with that population of students that didn't work. And it was obvious it didn't work. And when I was following the instructions of people who were telling me to do this, it was making the classroom hard. And so this was Diane's advice to me, right here. And her advice was, approach teaching through the eye of a saboteur. So she was encouraging me to kind of blow up the system. But she was doing it, but she had more to say than that. You know, it wasn't just go destroy things. She's like, think about who the saboteur is. You know, the saboteur is the person who knows the system so well that they can apply a minimal amount of pressure for greatest effect. The saboteur is the one who effects change, and people don't really know if they're the one that's doing it or not. You know, so they're not sure what's happening there. And that advice really changed things for me. It changed my behaviors. I stopped being so direct and like, there's a problem, I gotta fix it, you know? And I stopped with that. And it became more subtle for me when I started approaching problems with the school, when I started approaching things that frustrated me, and whatnot. And so instead of just being just loud, I really made it my mission to understand how the system worked. And so the year I got tenure, I ran for vice president of my local. And I was encouraged to do this by I was very friendly with my colleagues and whatnot, and they had some respect for me, and they said, you know, run for vice president, Mike. It's an easy job. You won't have, you're all laughing because you all know this story. They're like, it's an easy job. You're not going to have a lot of responsibility. You'll work really closely with the president. You'll get to learn, and you'll see all these things. And then, you know, they're speaking my language. I'm like, I don't have to do a lot of work. I get to learn some stuff. I get to see how things work. You know, I get to know what happens when I press this. So I was like, all right, I'll run. And I ran unopposed. And so I got the vice president spot. And, you know, so that's October is when I was like official because we had late elections, so we had them in the fall. So it's October, I get the vice president spot. And in January, the president says, Mike, I'm pregnant. I'm like, okay. She's like, don't worry. You know, the baby's due in the summer, and I'll be back in the fall, and, you know, we'll be fine. You know, there might be like a couple weeks where you have to cover things, but you'll be okay. Okay. And June comes along, she has the baby, and it's the week before school the next year in August, and I go into my room to get set up, and there's a box, and it says, good luck. Because she decided she really liked being a mom, and she was staying home, and she wasn't coming back ever. So this advice was, you know, this was sticking with me. The approach from the saboteur was sticking with me because it was the only way that I was really going to survive in there. So that's how I started learning about the system and really getting behind the curtain. And I got to tell you, if you've never been in local leadership, run for local leadership. It's the most eye-opening experience you will ever have. When you get to see under the hood of how your administration operates, it's interesting. I'll just leave it at that because I know who's in the room. Okay. So one of the lessons that I needed to learn still was not to be so overt and aggressive with what I thought were the right ideas. And so we had this opportunity at my school to really rethink how we taught kids. I leveraged my position as president to have opportunities to talk to the superintendent. And I was going through grad school at the time too. And so we would have these monthly meetings. It was just like it was a checkup meeting. You know, it's like, how are things going? How are things going with the faculty? What are some things that are bubbling up for them? And I'd report back to them like some of the things that we see as concerns. And you know, we would have this back and forth about what we could do about it. And then afterwards, he's like, well, how's grad school going? And I would beat his ear about the work that I was doing in grad school about rethinking how school could be organized and how we could redo curriculum. And he gave us an opportunity to kind of change the school. I'm going to talk about that in a bit, but I want to get to this piece on being a bad teacher. Because we had a really successful time with it, but I was a really adamant advocate for the program that we had. And I wasn't paying attention to how it was affecting people outside of the program. You know, I was really concerned with how it was affecting the kids. And the students that were in our program were really flourishing. But it was causing consternation, especially for central administration, because it was revealing things about the way that school was run that made certain positions irrelevant. And so there was a lot of pushback. And I was pretty adamant about how successful we were being, and to the point where I got kind of obnoxious. And then I got sent to teacher jail. So the following year, I was removed from the program. And I was sent into this side classroom. Well, it wasn't really a classroom. It was the custodian break room. And it was connected to the boiler room. So my campus had 12 buildings. And one of the buildings was the boiler room, and all that was in that building was the boiler room plus the custodian break room. And so the custodian break room got repurposed into a classroom, and that's where they stuck Mike, because there was no one else there. Like, there were no hallways. Like, you had to walk outside to get to that room. And so they thought I'd be isolated out there and that I couldn't spread my bad attitude to the rest of them. And I knew it was personal, because this was sitting there in my first day. I actually took this picture and I tweeted it. I said, this is the latest in ed technology. So that Pepsi machine was there the day I walked into my classroom, which was 3 days before we had kids. And as soon as I saw it, I sent an email. I was like, there's a Pepsi machine in here. I sent this picture and I said, can someone please move it before the children arrive? And I got no answer. And then I was like, all right, they're busy. It's the first day of school. I'll give them some space. Next day I come in, still sitting in my classroom. Hey, there's a Pepsi machine in here. It's 3 feet off the board in the middle of the room. Can you please come get it? Radio silence. Day before kids arrive. Still here. Come get the Pepsi machine. And finally, I get an email back from the principal, who, I have a lot of respect for my principal that I had there, and we had a really good relationship, but she had her hands tied by central administration. And she said, we have to wait for the company to come get it. And it didn't fit out the door. It was too big for the door. They actually had to come and take it apart. So kids show up the next day. And I was being punished because I had never taught, I had never been trained. I had never taught a self-contained special ed class. I was a biology teacher. They're like, you got special ed physical science and biology and gen ed physical science and honors biology. So that was my year, okay? So the special ed kids come in, and this one boy, his name was Kevin. Kevin walks in the door and he goes, and he says, Miss Ritzius? I said, yes, Kevin? He's like, I can't learn in here. I'm like, why not, Kevin? He's like, I love soda. So you know, it wasn't in the students' best interest in sending us out here for the classroom. That stayed in my classroom for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and it didn't get moved. It only got moved because I showed up with my favorite toy, which is my reciprocating saw. And I walked in to sign in the morning, and I dropped this big, dirty, dusty saw on the desk. It's in the principal's office. And now that saw with that blade on it, if I'm holding it here, it's touching the floor. You know, it's a big, ugly saw. And the secretary's eyes are like huge, and she says, "What's that for?" She thinks I'm going to do something fun in science. I said really loud so the principal could hear it. I said, I have this Pepsi machine in my classroom, and no one's moved it. So I have a prep at 11, and my lunch is at 12. So I'm gonna cut that machine up, and I'm gonna put it outside, and I'll stack the sodas behind my desk so you can have them. That was at 7:15. At 7:25, that machine was out of my room. So really the lesson here was like sometimes you gotta have the bad attitude to do right by kids. And so I learned that it's like oftentimes you hear like, do it for the children. Why don't you get on board with everybody? And I learned that that's not really an honest thing, you know? And sometimes you have to open your own eyes and see what's happening around you to be a good teacher and a good advocate for kids. And you know, even though that was a punishment year for me, and I'll admit, I was awful to my administrators then. I like awful. Like I was an empowered terrorist to my administrators. But I had a great year with the kids. We had a lot of fun, and it was because I kind of felt like I was free. You know, it's like I didn't care about the dumb rules. I didn't care about, and I'm not telling you, this is not advice. All right, putting on my NJE hat now, this is not advice. Do not follow my example. But I was kind of free to like do the things I knew that really worked in the classroom that were best for kids. So I started ignoring like the bad parts of the curriculum. I started ignoring like the bad lessons, the things that I knew didn't work. And I was daring them to come after me. I was like, I dare you to try and discipline me because I'm going to make it really hard for you. So that's my bad teacher story. So back to my program. No, this is a positive thing. I hear uh-oh here. No, so this is a positive thing. So this goes back to this idea, like what happens when I press this, you know? So I'm a big fan of breaking things to see how they work. That was actually my job when I worked as a molecular biologist. We would study these big proteins. There are proteins that controlled how your brain works, actually. And we at that time, science did not know how they were shaped. So it was my job to break them to see how the different pieces of them operated. And I kind of carried that idea into school. So I started trying to break different pieces of school to see how it functioned and then see how we could do it better. And that was like at the heart of my master's degree when I was doing that work and I was having those conversations with my superintendent. And you know, we talked about like how school could be different. So after those conversations I had with him, he said, you know, give me a proposal. So that was December. In January, I had a group of colleagues together, and they were all on board with this because they were some of the people that really helped me with that degree. Honestly, they earned as much of that degree as I did because we would sit and talk and unpack ideas all the time together. So it's working with them that really, really helped me be successful in grad school. But so we had one meeting in January, and we took our notes from that meeting, and we sent them over to the superintendent. And then I saw the agenda for the February board meeting. We have this wonderful program coming. It's going to begin in September, and it's going to be project-based learning. And it's like, we had nothing other than that one meeting. So we had 6 months to see what would happen if we would break school and reconfigure it. And what we ended up with was it was a high school group of kids. It was cross-curricular. It was grades 9 through 12 in the same room. It was a 3,500 square foot room that we repurposed. We had 20 minutes of content teaching per subject area a week. Not 40 minutes a day, it was 20 minutes a week. And it was all project driven. And the results that we got with them were pretty astounding. You know, there were 50% of them had IEPs. We were a Title I school, so all the kids were on free and reduced lunch. And this was back when the HESPA was being administered here in Jersey. It wasn't the park. The rest of our school, they had about 70% of the kids would pass the literacy piece, and about 40 passed math. For our kids, for 3 years, well, 2 of those years, I'll take credit for it, because the first year I won't take credit for that group of kids because they went through traditional teaching. And they were very small. There's only 6 of them as juniors that year. But the following year, we had a full complement of juniors. And the year after that, we had a full complement of juniors that had started with us as either sophomores or freshmen. Our kids, for 2 of those last 2 years, 100% passed the language arts piece. And only 2 for both years didn't pass math the first time around. They got it the second time around. And it was because we did less with them, not more. We removed a lot of the things that got in the way. You know, so we looked at all these different disciplinary pieces and really structured teaching pieces, and we recognized those pieces were so rigid that it didn't give enough room for our kids to be themselves. And so we removed those things from the class environment. And in breaking things, we really got to see how school should be and how school could be, and our kids really flourished because of that. But in doing that, in removing those classes and going into those fully project-based learning systems, that's when the entire curriculum department realized that they didn't have any control anymore, and that's when they got into the superintendent's ear, and that's why I spent my year in exile, and I needed my Sawzall. So we start to, in that system too, we really start to learn some stuff about working with kids and classroom management and things like that. And it was less about knowing the best practice and knowing the rules and knowing the research, and it became more about just being a human being. And so I always said, like, this was my best classroom management tool, was a Cliff Bar. I'm a notorious snacker. So I had a whole desk drawer full of food. And when we went to that project-based environment, instead of it being the 40-minute song and dance and scramble that we have to do all the time with the kids, we had all day to work with the kids. So it slowed the pace way down. And when one of the students was having a really bad day, instead of having to send them out of the classroom because we had this precious 40 minutes, we had the luxury of sitting down with the kids and having a conversation with them and like getting to know them and see why they were having that bad day. And those kinds of conversations are always better over food. So I would pull my snack drawer out and like, let's go sit. And we had another breakout room off the side of that space, and we would just have conversations. And so it made a really humane place for the classroom. And it took those stresses and rigors that really aren't necessary, because I mean, who determined that 40 minutes is the ideal time to learn anything? And so we had the flexibility to work around that, and it really changed the place, and it made it a much more humane type of learning environment for our kids. So this was we're going to back it up a little bit in my story. So this was when I first became the local president, when I got my surprise box. I had these ideas about what it meant to be a leader, and they were terrible ideas. So I thought the leader had to be the vocal one, the one out front, the one that was strong, the one that got it done, the one that told you what to do. And my membership disabused me of that idea pretty readily, and in not the most kind way. And it was a real learning experience for me. And what I didn't realize is, I thought I had these great grand ideas, and this is what best practice says. And I would go to these trainings for NJEA and be like, this is what NJEA says, without any regard for the people that were there in front of me. So I had these beautiful unicorn ideas. So I'm facing it from the front, but they're on the back end. They had to shovel it all after my idea was done. So it was a really humbling experience for me. And I think that's an important thing for us as we either self-identify as leaders or become school leaders. What we might think is this beautiful, wonderful unicorn. Well, we have to realize the unicorn's got a back end. And we have to be aware of which direction that back end is pointing and if anybody's standing behind it. Because what we think is wonderful may have effects on people that we don't recognize. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn too, because I had a lot of support in bringing those ideas forward, but when they were finally executed, and since I felt really self-sufficient in doing this stuff, and I didn't get buy-in, and I didn't create ownership culture, and I didn't give people an opportunity to be part of the plan, I started to realize that my plans were weak, and that they didn't have the strength that they needed, and they didn't have the support that they needed, and they weren't as inclusive or collective in their development. And so that was a really humbling experience. Another part of that humbling experience. So I taught at Votech, and we had an extremely talented bakery shop. And the teacher there taught the kids how to make all these delicious pastries. And somebody had to eat them because those pastries weren't going to eat themselves. So during professional development sessions, we had a lot of PD at our school because we were deemed a school in need of improvement all the time because we had such a diverse population and a non-traditional population, and a population really that stood outside of the assumptions that the people who architected NCLB made, because we aggregated kids of need in our space. It wasn't just a community of kids, so it wasn't like this normal distribution that you would get. And anyway, we would have all these PD sessions, and one of the rules about the PD sessions is they would provide lots of pastry, but you had to be in the PD session to get the pastry. Well, me not being the rule follower and the pastry addict that I am, I would steal these pastries on a regular basis. And so I was in the room that had the pastries, and I'm eating one, and there was an issue that was cooking with the assistant superintendent that we were not getting anywhere on. And it was because usually when we had a meeting, it was always a shooting match. So she would stake her side of the table, I would be on my side of the table, and we just at each other the whole time. So she comes walking in as I'm eating this pastry, and I'm not allowed to be eating the pastry because it was an English meeting and I'm a science teacher, and I was like, I stuffed that pastry right in my mouth. And she, I don't know if she noticed or not, she didn't say, but then she starts talking at me about the situation that we had. And I'm sitting there, and she would pause and give me an opportunity to talk, and I would. And she would talk some more, and I still had pastry in my mouth. I didn't have anything to drink. I couldn't chew. I'm like trying to swallow, and she would stop, and I would. And she'd say a little more, and I'd. And so she talked to me for a good 4 minutes, and I didn't say a word. And by the end of it, we resolved the problem. I have no idea how that happened, but we did. So what I realized is the woman just wanted to be heard. And so it was time for me to shut up. And I started doing that more. And the more I did that, the more I realized that I was creating space for other people. And creating that space allowed people to step into their own leadership roles. And it actually, the better I got at this and the less talking I did, the more robust our local became, the better our learning communities that we were building became. So it really, and actually the better teacher I became too, because I wasn't telling kids what to do, I was actually listening to them. So it was a really good, humbling lesson that I had there. So a lot of this was really about me learning to really manage myself, and think about the effects that I had in the spaces that I was occupying. And I feel like I'm at a point now where I'm at least aware of it. I might not be so good at it. My colleague Rich over there might tell he'll tell me I fail regularly. Rich and I share an office, and we yell at each other a lot. But it's all out of love. But it's something that I'm least aware of, and I'm working on a lot. And I feel like it's been having some good effects. Another thing that I needed to learn here was that I'm not awesome, and that nobody else is awesome either. It's really about this collective approach, So this was something. I have a good friend who likes to make these trolling kind of blog posts and stuff around ed reform, and so he and I were playing around with stuff, and this picture came from when Waiting for Superman was a real big deal. And so really, it's not about waiting for the Superman or finding the silver bullet or creating the magic solution. It was about how do a group of people get together, solve their own problems. It's like nobody's coming to save you. Now what? And it also meant I'm not there to save anybody either. So let's all just roll up our sleeves and we'll figure out how to get through this. And that's how we developed the learning community that we had with those kids. After it got shut down in third year when I got sent into exile, that superintendent was removed 2 years later. If you find me at the bar, I'll tell you his name, I'll tell you what to Google, and you will have the most eye-opening newspaper article you will ever see. But yeah, that's a good one. But anyway, the principal really liked what we did, and so she gave us the opportunity to create another program. But this time, we were very inclusive with how we did it, and we were very collective with how we did it. So in building the program, we were really cognizant of the needs of people outside of the program. How did this affect the guidance department? How did this affect the curriculum department? How do we get them to be owners of this program too? It wasn't this forced buy-in type of approach that we took. Instead, it was really a shared leadership kind of approach. It was like, let's all build this together and let's see what it means to be good teachers and have good teaching with this population of kids. Because the reason we really struggled as much as we did is because we tried to force suburban middle class learning approaches upon urban special ed students. They needed different things. And so we actually worked with the kids too to build that learning community. So learning community version 2, we cycled with the kids as groups. We had them in their own grade levels, but we cycled with them as groups. And the freshman year, they had a lot of opportunity to help shape the way that community looked. And we had them again as sophomores. And the first couple weeks, we had 7 or 8 students that were at it as sophomores. They weren't with us as freshmen. And they did that thing that kids do the first couple days of school. They were trying us on. They were seeing what they could get away with. But we didn't have to say anything. The rest of the kids in the class were like, we don't do that here. Like, that's not cool. It's like, just chill out and you're going to have a good time here. And so they had this high degree of ownership because we all built it together. It wasn't this we're awesome savior type of approach to building the school. It was a shared community that we all had together. And that informed this kind of thing that happened. Back in 2010, my sister Chrissy and I, and 8 of our friends, had this experience at a tech conference. And we decided to take that experience and share it with teachers. And that for me anyway, that was really just another way to embody this new collective shared leadership type of thing that was really starting to become alive for me. So we started EdCamp in 2010, and instead of saying, this is how you EdCamp, we just said, this is what we did, and you can do it too. And it turned into what we all know EdCamp is now. I don't have to go over that story because I'm sure most of this room knows it after seeing the show of hands earlier today. And so that brings me to really where I am now, working at NJEA. I spent a lot of time breaking the system, and seeing how it operated. And so, I spent a lot of time educating myself. I also spent a lot of time advocating for other people, but I learned that advocating for other people isn't going out there and being the white knight swinging the sword, but rather being able to elevate those folks, to empower them. And advocacy is for everybody. It's not just for the union working with the teachers. It was advocacy for the kids too, and it's advocacy for communities. And so it's how do we elevate the people who are in those learning spaces and to really fend for themselves and build the community that they want to have for themselves and attend to their own needs. They don't need us coming in there to save them. What they need is for us to give them the room and support to save themselves. And so that was the last piece there, this idea of organizing. That is really, I know it's the slogan that we're using at NJEA now, but it's a slogan that resonates so much with me. So I borrowed it. And so we're organizing groups of people now to build their own learning communities, to build their own spaces, to tend to their own needs, to do what needs to be done to move forward. And you got to see a taste of that earlier. That Pro Action Cafe that we did is a form of self-organizing, community-driven practice. I didn't come in there and tell you how to do all those things. I just provide the space for you to do it yourselves. And so that's where I am now. It's about trying to be as knowledgeable as possible, to create the space for people to lead and move forward on their own. And I'm just here to help. Thanks.